This is the story of a clash between three princes, three rulers who between 2013 and 2015 rose to power in the richest oil monarchies in the world, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. A generation with unbridled ambition and dreams of shaping the future of the Arab world.
These are people who think that this power is given to them forever. It's clear that these powerful men are just like spoiled children.
The rivalry between these three men has plunged the Gulf into a crisis unlike any other. At 33, Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS, is the youngest and governs Saudi Arabia. His favorite pastime, first-person shooter video games.
Mohammed bin Salman, he's someone who lives in this ulterior world where, you can control this entire game with a joystick. You are the master of death and life.
I think MBS, what's remarkable about him is he shoots first, and asks questions later.
Hailed as a reformer by the West, Riyadh's new strongman demonstrated his brutality as soon as he stepped into power by declaring a bloody war in Yemen. A conflict that has already claimed the lives of several tens of thousands. On the Arabian Peninsula, on the borders of the Saudi Kingdom, MBS found a useful ally in the shape of Mohammed bin Zayed, or MBZ. At 58 years old, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi rules the United Arab Emirates with an iron fist.
Mohammed bin Zayed is a military man. His mindset is very militaristic. He used the army as a means to gain more power.
Mohammed bin Zayed in particular has paranoia about being surrounded by people he cannot trust.
Now into the tank.
In order to establish their dominance in the Middle East, MBS and MBZ identified an enemy that needed to be defeated. This noisy neighbor is accused of collusion with Islamist groups and an overly friendly relationship with Iran. The most obvious mistake that the Emir of Qatar, Tamim al-Thani, has made is to overshadow the other two, most notably by staging the next Football World Cup in Qatar.
Obviously, for the UAE and Saudi Arabia, having Qatar host the most important sporting event in the world after the Olympic Games is something they cannot accept because it goes against their ego.
The princes of the Gulf states know each other well. There is this clash of ambitions that partly explains the crisis in relations between Qatar and certain of its neighbors.
In the Gulf, criticizing the royal family remains a treasonous act, punishable by prison or even the death penalty. No one has dared to risk it since the Saudi journalist and dissident Jamal Khashoggi was murdered in Istanbul in the Saudi consulate. His crime, having dared to publicly attack MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Today, it is only foreign observers who are able to freely discuss these personal quarrels that evolve into affairs of state and upset the delicate geopolitical balance.
The Gulf is far away for most Europeans, geographically. But since the Arab Spring, with the old powerhouses of Egypt, Syria, Libya, and also Iraq, obviously earlier, collapsing and disintegrating and disappearing, the new powerhouses of the Arab world are on the Gulf.
The ruling families of the Gulf are in fact tribes who gradually rose to power in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. These families were living as Bedouins, an essentially nomadic existence with little other than small-scale farming and fishing. The wealth and prosperity of any businessman was measured by the number of camels he had.
Something that all the Gulf countries have in common is the fact that up until the first oil crisis in 1973, they remained relatively poor.
Change obviously came quite quickly and almost brutally, I would say. The new leaders who rose to power in the 2010s represented a generational shift. Unlike their fathers, they had no memory of the harsh lives their families had led in the desert. They were born into a life of wealth and opulence.
The wildly extravagant Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is even rumored to have bought the most expensive painting in the world, the Salvator Mundi by Leonardo da Vinci.
$400 million is the bid, and the piece is sold.
A gift for his friend and ally, Mohammed bin Zayed, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, who built himself a Louvre museum designed by the architect Jean Nouvel. The same French architect was chosen by the royal family of Qatar to design the brand new National Museum in Doha.
There is a sort of political one-upmanship in terms of which emirate will invest the most in museums, for example, or other cultural endeavors. In the end, this rivalry between these emirates is to determine who is more committed to efforts to modernize.
These cities know very well that one day the oil will run out, and that now they need to attract capital, they need to attract advertising, they need to attract tourists. They absolutely need to be the city that houses the tallest building in the world, the most amazing, the most prestigious skyscraper, etc. Naturally, there is an element of childishness in this race to be the biggest and the best. We are dealing with monarchs who are driven by a need for power, who have an enormous amount of hubris, that type of pride.
And a country that is so small yet so rich must spend vast amounts of money to attract the spotlight. And so in 2013, when Tamim al-Thani came to power, the then 33-year-old sports enthusiast inherited the task of staging the most viewed football tournament in the world.
We are very proud that we're going to be hosting the World Cup in 2022. This World Cup is for all the Arabs, not for Qatar. If it was for Qatar, it will not be successful. We said that this whole World Cup is for all the Arabs, and that's why we're successful. It's a big challenge.
I met the Qatar Emir a couple of times on several occasions. He is competitive as a sportsman, so he plays tennis and he enjoys football, he enjoys sports. The royal family, Tamim himself, they are crazy about sports. Their investment at PSG in Paris, for example, is a very important part. I mean, Tamim himself goes to watch these matches because he's really drawn in.
Bonjour. Allez au Qatar.
With the money generated by oil and gas, the Qataris were able to afford to buy French football club Paris Saint-Germain, along with some of the world's most expensive players, as a way of promoting this small country with a population of only 250,000.
Merci mon frère. Merci beaucoup mon frère.
Sport for the Qataris is a way to gain unparalleled publicity. Everyone loves sports. They are broadcast 24 hours a day on televisions in countries all over the world. So investing in sport is interesting in visibility and hence is a tremendous way to gain recognition very quickly.
النموذج الاقتصادي الذي نقدمه وما يحيط به من ثراء رياضي وثقافي هو في رأينا أفضل مؤشر على النمو الصحي لأية دولة.
In the streets of Doha, these decisions are not discussed, nor the scandals that accompany this sport-based diplomacy, such as the accusations of corruption or the many deaths on the building sites of the World Cup stadiums.
We are in another step now for Qatar. It's other level now. Something special, you know. The first Arabic country, and you know it's Qatar. You don't have big historic like Saudi, but he's the first to take this represent for the World Cup. So all Arab will be jealous.
The fact that Qatar is the first Arab country to host the World Cup shows they have the ability to spot an opportunity ahead of the others. I mean, the UAE has the funds to host the tournament as well, but it was the Qataris who pulled it off, and that's a fact. Even if other countries viewed it as a little kid trying to play in the big kids' playground.
At the end of the last World Cup, a Saudi newspaper printed an extremely revealing headline. The 2018 World Cup is over. See you for the next one in 2026. What, of course, is implied is that the 2022 World Cup does not exist. What this anecdote shows us is that the 2022 World Cup is quite hard to swallow for the Saudi and the UEA political elites.
The leaders of the neighboring countries could no longer stand to watch matches on Qatari channels, so they decided to attack one of the symbols of Tamim al-Thani's sports economy.
3, 2, 1.
We have the 5 European leagues, exclusive. We have CAF, we have Olympics, we have UEFA, we have FIFA, the biggest sports rights portfolio of any broadcaster in the world.
And all of a sudden, a ghost channel appeared. A broadcaster no one had heard of until then that's called beoutQ.
It's a mocking of the name of BeIN, so it's the opposite of BeIN, is be out. I mean, it's that simple. And they add a Q on the end to represent Qatar, so be out Qatar. Oh, here we go. So you'll see beIN Sports 3, our channel, 22 minutes, 32 seconds, and there's about a 6-second delay where beoutQ takes the feeds, puts its own logo on top of BeIN's logo, and transmits it as though it's its own content, its own channel. You can quite see the NBA, the NFL, the Super Bowl final, every sport you can think of is being pirated.
So all of the matches can be found on this channel without any royalties being paid to FIFA or UEFA for the rights.
This is an animation mocking beIN Sports that beoutQ created. So the animation shows a building with people protesting outside beIN Sports. This is a clear caricature of an executive at beIN Sports, surrounded by cash, you know, a fat cat, looking at his screen, suddenly sees a beoutQ advert of a car coming along. That car draws the crowds, and this is obviously very symbolic of what's happening, and lo and behold, they open up a new, brand new, sparkling beoutQ headquarters. It's a great example of stealing content and mocking the victim in the process. We don't exactly know who's behind it, but it's a Saudi entity, so it is pirated from Saudi Arabia. It sells advertising in Saudi riyals,
It's widely available across Saudi Arabia in cafes, in public areas. It's quite clear it's being transmitted on Arabsat, which is headquartered in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is its biggest shareholder.
The broadcaster is claiming €1 billion in damages, and Qatar has filed a complaint with the World Trade Organization.
All the leagues, all the major leagues in Europe have actually filed a complaint and said we don't want this to happen and continue, but the Saudi and Emiratis don't really care about it.
This kind of piracy on a scale we have never seen before is not merely anecdotal. It reveals the rifts in the Gulf and a conflict that has been destabilizing an entire region. For us to better understand this hatred between Tamim al-Thani on one side and Mohammed bin Salman and Mohammed bin Zayed on the other, we have to go back a few years.
The real split in the region stems from the Arab Spring.
The three princes came to power after the start of the Arab Spring. Tamim al-Thani in 2013, Mohammed bin Zayed in 2014, and Mohammed bin Salman in 2015. All of these leaders handled the Arab Spring in a decisive way, politically speaking.
Dans leur équation politique, de manière déterminante.
When the Arab Spring began, the first reaction of the three countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, was to increase the salaries of all civil servants.
These are conservative monarchies. These are people, they are the maintainers of the status quo. They are the status quo, and they don't want things to change because change is dangerous for them because they're not democratically elected.
The revolutionary movements that arose in the Arab world profoundly divided the Gulf monarchies, who were in total disagreement over an appropriate response.
I think for the Gulf monarchies, certainly for MBS and for MBZ, they're horrified by the Arab Spring. It's like, man, they're coming for us, and we gotta react.
Qatar did not feel threatened by the Arab Spring, mainly because it is the smallest of the three countries in terms of population. There are simply not enough people to form an organized opposition. It is the least populated of the three countries, but also the richest. Qatar is the country with the highest GDP per capita on the planet. So obviously the motivation to challenge the power of the al-Thani family is extremely low, if not non-existent.
The Emir of Qatar and the royal family there, their reaction to the Arab Spring is very different. In some ways it's like more sophisticated. They thought, you know, this is a big wave coming, and we got to get on that wave and ride it, you know, and that's the only way we're going to survive because we can't fight it.
And Qatar has its own unique way of influencing the course of history, the most watched news channel in the Arab world.
I think without Al Jazeera, the Arab Spring wouldn't have run as smoothly, let's put it that way. Al Jazeera is an entity that is obviously state-owned. It was set up in 1996 as part of a vision of the older Emir to somewhat liberalize civil society in the Arab world. It was all about, you know, allowing people to speak up against authoritarian oppression, for example, across the region. Al Jazeera was obviously giving a voice to anyone. And Al Jazeera, you could be a Shia radical, and you could speak there. You could be a Sunni radical, you could speak there.
الضباط والجنود الذين يستطيعون أن يقتلوا معمر القذافي فليفعل لا يجوز.
This call for the murder of the Libyan dictator was made by one of the most influential ideologues of the Muslim Brotherhood, a political refugee in Qatar.
So the feeling was that Al Jazeera was increasingly trying to give voice to opponents of the Arab world, in particular to the Muslim Brotherhood.
Beyond the media aspect, the Qataris have financed and armed Islamist movements in Libya and Syria. And in Tunisia and Egypt, they have contributed to the electoral victories of the Muslim Brotherhood. Saudis and Emiratis have seen their worst enemies gain power and will now do everything to overthrow them.
I understand why Saudi Arabia and the UAE would consider this problematic, because Islamism is something, and that's very important to understand, why they frame Islamism as terrorism, is that Islamism, political Islam in the Arab world, has been the natural opposition to authoritarian rule, and particularly the Arab nationalist autocrats that we've seen emerging in the 1960s. So Islamism and controlling Islamism is something at the absolute priority for Mohammed bin Zayed, Mohammed bin Salman, because it's a force you cannot control.
To get rid of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Emirates and Saudi Arabia staked everything on the return of the military. In Egypt, they choose to support General Sisi and guarantee him financial aid. Under his command, the army organized a coup that ended in a bloodbath. The Egyptian regime took its revenge on Qatar by condemning a team of Al Jazeera reporters to 3 years in prison.
And that's how the rifts deepened on the Arabian Peninsula between Qatar on the one hand and Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates on the other.
When MBS and MBZ look over at Qatar, they see the Muslim Brotherhood, which they loathe with every fiber in their bodies.
That's why bombing Al Jazeera, as Mohammed bin Zayed said in private conversation, is something that is completely understandable from the viewpoint of a Mohammed bin Zayed who is absolutely obsessed with controlling the public sphere, or somewhat controlling civil society.
In the United Arab Emirates, there's an extreme concentration of power in the hands of the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, who has reined in all his brothers.
Mohammed bin Zayed's first project was to create a credible army and to focus all its military strategy around the protection of its borders.
أنا جدا سعيد اليوم بوجودي معاكم يا إخوان. الدول مو بلأنها 10 مليون ولا 100 مليون ولا 1000. الدول بالإرادة يا عيالي. ولا تستهينون بإرادة الرجال.
Mohammed bin Zayed attended Sandhurst, the prestigious British military academy. He has a pretty warrior-like side to his personality. He's very determined.
Just landed at this strange planet, but there seems to be no sign of intelligent life anywhere. السلام عليكم. كيف حالكم أيها الحضور الرائعون؟
Mohammed bin Zayed has always been fascinated by new military technologies, and he now organizes an exhibition every 2 years that has evolved into the most important arms fair on the planet.
This arms fair really is MBZ's baby, which is why he always goes there without fail and visits each of the stands, showing just how much he is in his element in this environment.
Je vais vous présenter mon fils parce que j'ai venu avec l'année dernière, vous m'avez présenté votre famille.
This is MBZ's baby and part of the overall strategy.
With his checkbook diplomacy, the Crown Prince, himself a former helicopter pilot, was able to attract plenty of Western capital. By spending billions of euros each year, the United Arab Emirates has become the most militarized country per capita on the planet.
In the Emirates, there is one battle tank per 2,100 people. In France, there is one battle tank per 250,000 people.
It's an arsenal that the prince likes to show off in demonstrations of strength. The goal is to impress important governments around the world.
الشرق الأوسط منطقة فيها كثير من الأحداث تحاول دائما ترسل رسالة إيجابية للعالم. الشرق الأوسط ممكن يطلع منه خير ونحن موجودين. قيادة الدولة ملتزمة بضمان وسلامة واستقرار الوطن والمواطن والمقيم.
Here we see the true face of MBZ as a prince who wants to extend his influence beyond the borders of his country. He wants to become a charismatic leader in the Arab Muslim world.
By creating what some refer to as the modern-day Sparta of the Middle East, MBZ hoped to garner more respect in the region.
والشعب تحت أمره يقوم وقفة رجل واحد وقف.
As the leader of 1 million Emiratis, Mohammed bin Zayed seeks to establish himself as an essential ally of the West in the fight against the Islamist threat. In this effort to seduce certain Western powers, MBZ has two aces up his sleeve: the UAE as a tax haven and a major tourist destination. This image has largely been built around Dubai, with its famous artificial islands, its luxury hotels, and its tolerance towards the Western way of life. With every official visit of a head of state, the Crown Prince always puts on a show, with a military parade in the colors of the honored guest.
Under the cloak of modernity and liberalism, Mohammed bin Zayed welcomed the Pope with all the pomp and ceremony that one would expect. It was the first time that a country on the Arabian Peninsula had hosted His Holiness. This display was of course meant to demonstrate that the UAE was open to the world and all its religions and creeds. None of this stops MBZ from ruling his kingdom with an iron fist.
As ambitious as MBZ is, he always knew his country was too small to play in the big leagues. He needed an ally, and he found it in Saudi Arabia.
Mohammed bin Zayed saw MBS's rise to power as an amazing opportunity. An amazing opportunity because the new Saudi ruler shared the same political project as the UAE, namely an autocratic modernization.
They built this mentor-protege relationship, with Mohammed bin Zayed being the mentor, Mohammed bin Salman being his protege, like a uncle-nephew kind of relationship. They have an agreement of bringing Saudi Arabia out of the Middle Ages into the 21st century, a similar approach that the UAE had taken.
Gone are the days of the old Saudi way of life. The role of religion in society has been reduced, and the country's economic infrastructure has been modernized.
Saudi Arabia has a population of 20 million people and depends solely on its oil exports as its only revenue stream. a resource whose supply is diminishing year after year. The country needs to diversify, and MBS is ready for the challenge.
He's a big guy. He's very dynamic. You know, he walks into the room and everybody stops talking. He's extremely ambitious.
إذا نجحنا في ال5 سنوات القادمة سوف تلتحق فينا دول أكثر وسوف تكون النهضة القادمة في العالم في 30 سنة القادمة في الشرق الأوسط إن شاء الله. هذه حرب السعوديين، هذه حربي اللي أخوضها شخصيا، ولا أريد أن أفارق الحياة إلا وأرى الشرق الأوسط في مقدمة مصاف العالم، وأعتقد أن هذا الهدف سوف يتحقق 100%.
الله يعطيك طول العمر يا سيدي.
He's a modern, charismatic guy. Looks women in the eye, shakes their hands. He's very direct, and that's a thing that kind of Westerners appreciate. He met all these big venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. On his trips to the United States, he's just kind of wowed everybody.
And yet, nothing of MBS's meteoric rise to power in Saudi Arabia was predetermined. In 2015, his father Salman became king at the age of 79. He is one of the last living sons of Ibn Saud, the founder of the Saudi state. And for the first time in 60 years, power is being passed on to a new generation. MBS is clearly the favored son, and behind the scenes, he has overshadowed all his rivals.
He's been portrayed as a hothead, he's impulsive, he's not very strategic in his decisions, he's very childish sometimes. That definitely applies to Mohammed bin Salman.
And that differentiates him very much from his predecessors, who were these kind of old sleepy guys who were just totally detached, or, you know, other members of the royal family that are living in Monte Carlo or somewhere like that. And he's a local young guy who likes to play video games, and all the Saudis get that.
At only 29 years old, MBS became the youngest defense minister in the world. And as soon as he arrived in this powerful position, his focus turned towards the old enemy.
For the Saudis, the existential threat in the region is Iran.
احنا هدف رئيسي للنظام الإيراني، الوصول لقبلة المسلمين هدف رئيسي للنظام الإيراني. لن ننتظر حتى تصبح المعركة في السعودية، بل سوف نعمل لكي تكون معركة لديهم في إيران وليس في السعودية.
There is a very strong rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia, who both pose as the two great powers of the Gulf. What really disturbs Saudi Arabia is the expansionism of revolutionary Shiism.
They feel totally surrounded by Iran, who has a heavy presence in Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and of course in Yemen with the Houthis.
It's the Middle East, you know, everything's connected to everything else. For the Saudis, the Houthis are the Iranians. I mean, they're the same thing. It's more complicated than that.
In early 2015, MBS took over the reins as commander-in-chief of the Saudi military. During that time in Yemen, the Houthis, a local Shiite and pro-Iranian militia, seized the Yemeni capital, Sana'a.
The Crown Prince took this to mean that Iran was effectively a presence at the southern border of the Saudi kingdom.
When Mohammed bin Salman decided to intervene in Yemen, the idea was to signal his arrival in power by showing that under his rule, Saudi Arabia was not a country to mess with.
بلا شك انه الحرب اللي قامت ما كانت خيار بالنسبه للمملكه العربيه السعوديه، كان يعني امر لابد ان نقوم فيه، ولا بيكون السيناريو الاخر سيناريو اسوأ بكثير.
بدليل أن الحوثي وصالح لا زالوا عندهم أسلحة مخزون أسلحة.
نستطيع أن نجتث الحوثي وصالح في أيام قليلة.
MBS knew he could count on the support of his ally MBZ and his well-equipped army to support him in this newly declared war.
The Emirati intervention in Yemen allowed them to exhibit their military power on the world stage.
When the Emiratis went into Yemen, it was a quite impressive operation. I mean, I know it impressed a lot of people in the Pentagon. They were like, you know, wow, Emiratis went in, very impressive operation. Maybe this won't be so bad. I think that all changed very quickly.
Of course, as with all wars at the start, everyone was sure it would be short and sweet. The reality was obviously a completely different story.
They are killing soldiers, civilians, policemen, common people. They are targeting universities. The Saudi regime is killing students. They are the terrorists. They can bomb Sana'a to Kingdom Come. We will never surrender.
The war in Yemen is going terribly wrong. It's a massive humanitarian crisis. You have cholera, you have famine. It's a nightmare.
It's a terrible mess. The Saudis and their Emirati allies are really bogged down in it. It's a bit like their Vietnam War.
This anti-Iranian obsession of the Saudis is not necessarily shared by the other monarchies of the Arabian Peninsula.
The Qataris said, we don't want to get involved in Yemen. What the Qatari military did is they moved to southern Yemen to help the Saudis protect the southern border, but they didn't get involved in the air war and putting boots on the ground in the same way that the Emiratis or the Saudis did.
As a result, Qatar is considered by Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi as being too close to Tehran.
Qatar and Iran share an offshore gas field in northern Qatar, in the Persian Gulf. And inevitably, this requires a form of cooperation with Iran. This means Qatar cannot afford a breakdown in relations with Iran, as it would be against their own financial interest.
Their relationship with Iran is a pragmatist one. The center of gravity for Qatar in many ways is their LNG base. Having Iran now as a logistical partner for Qatar is something, it's not about choice.
These disagreements over Iran added to the tensions arising from the Arab Spring. In the Gulf, Tamim al-Thani's Qatar is finding itself increasingly isolated.
What that has done is basically put Qatar diametrically opposed to MBS and MBZ. And so that has set up this kind of really intense regional conflict, basically among these monarchs. And that's what we're seeing here, but that's unprecedented.
And these tensions between the three princes were brought to a head as a new figure entered the fray.
A very crucial element of the crisis is basically Donald Trump. He's the key figure that is the facilitator to make this crisis what it is today.
There are links between Donald Trump and the pro-Saudi camp. There are economic ties. For example, we know that Donald Trump has a golf course in the United Arab Emirates.
There are a lot of people who were close to the Trump campaign who have business interests in the UAE. So it was a very tight net that finally Mohammed bin Zayed had.
The Emiratis are very influential in Washington, as are the Saudis. But together, they work as a team in Washington.
Les Émirats Arabes Unis ont eu cette intuition.
The United Arab Emirates had this rather remarkable intuition that Donald Trump was a man with a rather basic understanding of geopolitics, and that there was an opportunity for them to shape his vision of the region. Many foreign policy advisors and think tanks in the United States have received money from the United Arab Emirates in an effort to influence the Trump administration's key decisions concerning the Middle East.
A man that I've known, very special person, highly respected, and loves his country, I can tell you that, loves his country. And I think loves the United States, which to us is very important. Thank you very much. It's my honor to be here. Thank you, sir.
On the Middle East, the Trump campaign was very weak. They didn't have a policy, they didn't have a clear strategy. Mohammed bin Zayed saw an opportunity not only to change the policy of the US towards the Middle East, but also changing the policy of the US towards Qatar.
In Washington, the Emirati and Saudi lobbyists are targeting the president's entourage, and one man in particular.
The middleman between the United States and Saudi Arabia is Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner is Donald Trump's son-in-law, a 30-something-year-old who is totally inexperienced in Middle Eastern affairs.
He is the perfect ally for MBS and MBZ. It's really a match made in hell.
Right after the inauguration, so January 2017, right after, Jared Kushner was put in charge of the Middle East. That's your portfolio. So Jared literally took the map down of the Middle East, they rolled it out on the table, and they kind of said, okay, where are we in the Middle East? What do we got here? That's Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, all gone. That's Iran. Iran has those. So who are our friends?
In this region, the traditional partners have always been Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates.
We're going to do everything we can to strengthen those two pillars. So the whole strategy in the Middle East was to go hard against Iran. I mean, that was absolutely what the same exact thing that MBS and MBZ wanted, more than anything. So President Trump decides with Jared, our first trip abroad is going to be to Saudi Arabia.
King Salman, the guardian of holy places, greeted US President Donald Trump at Yamama Palace.
The Saudis basically just, opened their checkbook and, went all out. I mean, they spent something like $68 million. It was this kind of utterly grandiose. It looks like, Las Vegas.
An official visit full of pomp and ceremony with a red carpet rolled out for the president of the most powerful country in the world, and the American and the Saudi flags projected onto the facade of the Ritz-Carlton where the American delegation was staying.
That's beautiful. That is so beautiful. Heavy.
This is the war dance.
I can see that.
It's as if somebody said to MBS and MBZ, how do you impress President Trump? How do you really make him happy? And it was like, spend money.
It's a win-win situation, in inverted commas, that they have worked out between themselves. Something that President Trump didn't try to hide, even showing pictures of doing his shopping.
Some of the things that have been approved and are currently under construction and will be delivered to Saudi Arabia very soon, and that's for their protection. But if you look in terms of dollars, $3 billion, $533 million, $525 million. That's peanuts for you. Should have increased it.
There was something a bit obscene, a bit outrageous about the opulence on display during this state visit. But it summarizes rather accurately the extremely mercantile view that Trump has of successful diplomacy.
That's why we are here today, to be sure that we've tackled all the opportunities and achieve it, and also get rid of all the threats facing our both countries and the whole world. So I'm very glad to be here today. Thank you, Mr. President.
The discussion at the time was, look, Qatar is a problem. They are funding groups across the region that we don't like. They have a close relationship with Iran, which we don't like, and you don't like either. What shall we do about this? Trump, not knowing what was going on, was basically saying, yeah, well, if you can, take care of it, as loosely as it was. And taking care of it was seen as a green light by Mohammed bin Salman and Mohammed bin Zayed at the time to take action on Qatar.
The Gulf crisis began very precisely at midnight on May 24, 2017. At that exact moment, an article appeared on the website of the Qatari official news agency, QNA. The article claimed that Emir Tamim al-Thani, in a speech at a graduation ceremony for officer cadets, made remarks that went against all previous diplomatic rhetoric in the Gulf. The article was fake and was the result of a cyber attack. This came to light after a few weeks when the CIA dispatched computer experts to Doha.
Why were they made? Because that was supposed to be a prelude to a much bigger campaign to steer up dissidents and in Qatar and delegitimizing the Emir of Qatar in the eye of the domestic audience in Qatar, but also in the eye of a global audience.
Welcome
to tonight's broadcast focusing on the recent quotes from the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim al-Thani.
For 2 weeks, there was constant Qatar bashing on the airwaves of pro-Saudi media.
Qatar has always been the problem child of the Gulf. Other countries in the region that respect the rule of law and the historical links that bind them have tried to point it in the right direction. But Qatar has shown its true self, a source of funding for terrorist organizations.
The pressure was mounting, and then on June 5th, there was a complete breakdown of diplomatic and economic relations with Qatar.
The only land border that Qatar has with the Arabian Peninsula is with Saudi Arabia, and that land border being closed not just for individual traffic, but particularly for import and export of goods going in or out of Qatar. The airspace for any aircraft going into Qatar or coming from Qatar is closed in the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Any vessel heading towards Qatar or coming from Qatar is no longer allowed to dock in the UAE.
Everything was done to isolate Qatar as much as possible.
If you look at international law, this is something that you could interpret as an act of war.
When Saudi Arabia and the Emirates announced that blockade, I can tell you for sure that in the Pentagon, there were lots of fears that this was a prelude to an invasion, that these guys were going to war.
The problem was that at the time, Trump strongly supported Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates in these accusations.
The nation of Qatar, unfortunately, has historically been a funder of terrorism at a very high level. Nations came together and spoke to me about confronting Qatar over its behavior. So we had a decision to make. Do we take the easy road, or do we finally take a hard but necessary action?
These statements provoked panic within the U.S. administration, who found out about them on live TV. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson had to intervene.
Tillerson explained to Trump, who possibly hadn't realized, that the United States had their largest military base of the region in Qatar.
Trump at that time didn't know that Al Udeid air base, which is the most important air base for the US military in the entire region, all the operations in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and against ISIS are flown from there. He didn't know it was in Qatar. He actually thought it was in the UAE.
The U.S. certainly couldn't start taking sides in this dispute, especially not against Qatar, which Donald Trump eventually understood.
And so everybody got on the hotline and started calling the princes and saying, like, gotta take it down. Somebody used those exact words with me. They called the Saudis and said, called MBS and said, now is not the time for a war. Stop.
Plans for any invasion were suspended, but the embargo stayed in place. A new Cold War in the Gulf had begun.
بطبيعة مجتمعنا وشعبنا وكما تعلمون الحياة في قطر تسير بشكل طبيعي منذ بداية الحصار وقد وقف الشعب القطري تلقائيا وبشكل طبيعي وعفوي دفاعا عن سيادة وطنه واستقلاله.
Since the crisis, we've seen more arms deals are being signed, particularly by the Qataris. I think the Qataris have made some quite significant arms deals.
They bought warships, fighter planes and bombers in such large quantity that today Qatar has an air force totally disproportionate to the number of fighter pilots they have.
Tamim is winning on all fronts at the moment.
The people have really rallied around him. There are these new paintings of him on the streets of Doha and stickers of him on people's cars. And all of this was done in a rather unusually spontaneous way.
This embargo has made him into a true national figurehead and a statesman. This represents a bitter failure for Abu Dhabi and Riyadh.
In the role of the victim, Tamim al-Thani has come out of the crisis in a stronger position. Neither the embargo nor the accusations of exploitation of workers will stop them from holding the 2022 World Cup. For MBS and MBZ, this operation against Qatar turned into a fiasco and the war in Yemen into a quagmire. It is in this context that in October 2018, the Jamal Khashoggi affair became a global news sensation. Accused of having ordered the assassination of the Saudi journalist, MBS became a pariah on the international stage.
At the G20, you could see the Crown Prince was a little isolated, etc. It's true that everyone snubbed him to some extent.
Diplomatically, relations are unchanged. Saudi Arabia is still our friend. But I think the reality is like much messier than that. I can't imagine a time in the future when MBS is going to be able to come to the United States and show his face in public and people will not immediately say, that's the man who had Jamal Khashoggi killed.
Let's say he will stay in power for 40 years or 50 years. It will leave a mark for the next 5 decades on the relationship that Saudi Arabia will have with the West.
Then, all of a sudden, Vladimir Putin approached MBS with a now infamous high-five handshake, which was extremely popular in Saudi Arabia. There's a very good relationship between Putin's Russia, King Salman's Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates of MBZ.
In this great diplomatic game, the princes of Saudi Arabia and the UAE are increasingly turning towards Russia and China. These two countries are less concerned with human rights violations and war crimes. This is an unprecedented move for these traditional Western allies. This new generation of rulers is as powerful as it is unpredictable and threatens to further destabilize a Middle East already ravaged by years of conflict.